Global fund managers are piling back into stocks with the most bullish positioning since back in February. But at the same time, they're also flashing warning signs in relation to valuations, inflation, and the possibility of stagflation. So we'll be watching tomorrow's CPI report because it could be a pivotal point that decides the Fed's next move and the market's trajectory. But right now, we got this mixed division in the markets right now. We got bullish people, we got the crowd of bears out there, and right here we see Bank of America's latest global fund manager survey, which shows optimism among the funds is returning. Only 5% expect a hard landing for the global economy. Allocations to emerging markets hit a 2-year high, yet 91% of US stocks are overvalued, the highest on record, according to this article right here. So the Magnificent Seven trade, which will be Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Alphabet, Amazon, Tesla, Meta, they're all seen to be the most crowded trade in the entire world, and nearly half of managers call it overcrowded, even as more than half believe artificial intelligence is already boosting productivity. So is there a bubble in AI or is there not? That's the consensus, at least for now. There's no bubble in AI, but we'll keep on watching this. And the tech sector is the main concentration dated back all the way to the 1990s. With 1999 levels, the tech rally is increasingly concentrated. So today, the ratio of the equal weighted S&P 500 tech index to its cap weighted version hit its lowest level since April of 1999. And to put that more in plain speak, a handful of mega cap names are carrying the entire sector on their back. The top 10 stocks in the S&P 500 account for now nearly 40% of the index's market value, the highest share in decades. And in tech alone, Nvidia, Microsoft, Apple make up nearly 2/3 of the entire sector's value. Its market's leadership is on steroids. And historically, that kind of concentration has made markets more vulnerable to sudden shifts in sentiment, or shocks, if you must. Seasonality, the September effect, is sad. So this one was interesting reading about. So a lesser known risk, which is this seasonal affective disorder, which stands for SAD as we go into September, noted to be a tough month in the stock market for tech and large cap stocks, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ. It affects investors' mood with changes due to the season. So studies show that SAD, seasonal affective disorder, shows that it rises sharply as we head into August to September, leading to a more pessimistic outlook and weaker market performance. It's almost like it self-fulfills itself because, I got seasonal depression, and I'm not feeling good, and I'm going to make bad trades in the market, or whatever the case is. And that ends up showing in the stock market as well. So dating back to the late 1890s, the Dow has gained in only 42% of Septembers versus 60% in other months. And the average September return, negative 1.1%. And it's not a guarantee of a fall sell-off, but history says the odds aren't great. We also got a warning from this sir right here, Mr. Bannister right here. Let's highlight his name because I've never seen a name like that. So Barry Bannister, he's the Stifel chief equity strategist, and what he's warning of is echoes of the late 1990s. So this Barry Bannister guy at Stifel, who correctly predicted the earlier 2025 sell-off, is warning again. Everybody's calling for their warning calls, and he sees valuations as very extended, comparable to the euphoria before the dot-com crash, and that's been coming up quite a lot lately, that dot-com crash. But a sudden economic slowdown in the second half of this year could push the S&P 500 down around 14%, falling down to about 5,500 is where that would put. And he gives some advice to not necessarily sell all of your stocks, but just rotate towards more defensive value sectors like consumer staples, healthcare, rather than completely bailing out of stocks entirely. Now, I find that interesting because usually they say a rising tide lifts all ships, and in the reverse, so the same case is. So even if you're rotated out of some of these names, wouldn't all of the stocks to an extent kind of like feel the pain of the burn if there is this sell-off that a lot of people have been predicting that we talk about on this channel all the time? But we'll keep on watching. Now let's talk about this tariff impact that consumers are about to pay the price for. So according to Goldman Sachs, they find that so far US businesses have absorbed about 64% of tariff costs, consumers only 22%, and foreign exporters 14%. But by October, they're predicting that this flips around with consumers absorbing around 2/3 of all of those costs. Foreign businesses up higher towards 25%, and US firms down to just 8%. Now, Goldman projects core PCE inflation rising to 3.2% by December. That's well above the Fed's 2% target, further away from where they'd like to see it go. Appliances, electronics, and equipment are already seeing price jumps as domestic producers raise prices in the face of tariff-protected markets. Now, CPI, the Fed's pivotal data point that we'll be watching tomorrow, is expected to show core inflation rising 0.3% in July, and that'll be the biggest increase in 6 months, taking the annual core rate to 3.1%. Now, headline CPI is expected to come in at just 0.2% monthly, 2.9% year over year. This report is one of the 3 biggest releases that we'll get before the Fed's mid-September meeting, and normally rising inflation would keep the Fed from cutting rates, but the job market is showing cracks, and we've talked about this, that complete shocker that we got of a jobs report. Unemployment has climbed to 4.2%, although it's been in quite the range, but in the last few years it grew to 4.2% from 3.5%. And this is before companies are plowing money into AI, and now they're not necessarily hiring as much, and they want to be more productive using AI. So hiring has slowed sharply, so that's a red flag. And Fed officials are now weighing the risk of higher inflation against the risk of rising unemployment, which sounds like stagflation, doesn't it? So if they judge the labor market weakness as a bigger danger, something they need to pay more attention to, rate cuts are still possible, even with inflation above the target. Not to mention Trump wanting them to cut and where that necessarily takes us. Now let's talk about geopolitics and trade development. So on trade, there are 2 big headlines. Gold tariffs are now off of the table. There was this real scare that gold could potentially be tariffed and what would arise out of that. President Trump announced pretty much today that gold imports won't face duties, reversing an earlier customs ruling. Trump also signed an executive order. So this one was a big one right here. And it was in relation to trade talks with China. He signed an executive order delaying higher tariffs on China until November 9th. I believe, what's that, 90 days? So this creates a window for potential negotiations between President Xi Jinping and Trump, which they're expected to meet later on this year. And he's acting like he's optimistic about it, but he's not so sure a deal is going to be made. And I'd assume at some point we're going to see some type of sell-off, and who knows if it's going to be trade related or if it's just going to be because stocks just keep on running up. But here's where we stand, everybody. Global investors are bullish but uneasy about valuations, and it makes sense. Market leadership is dangerously concentrated. Seasonal patterns and economic slowdown risks loom, and it seems like it's making its way more into the news headlines and news articles. Tariff costs are about to start hitting consumers hard, according to some of these big banks and economists. And the CPI report tomorrow could be a huge deciding factor for the Fed's next move. I'll be watching Tuesday's CPI print closely because it may not just set the tone for September, it could shape the market's path for the entire rest of 2025. If you found this breakdown helpful, hit that like button, subscribe. I completely blew up last night, got 15 new subscribers overnight, hit 100 watch hours for the first time. I think one of my market update videos for the first time got like 1,400 views, so I'm super happy about that. I'll keep on watching where we're headed. Is it stagflation or is this AI rally still in control? Who knows? Stay tuned and we'll find out together, everybody. Have a good one.